Hi, I'm Phoebe.
And I'm Olivia.
And we'll be your anchors today.
Today we will be covering biodiversity out of the water down at the salt marsh.
Energy transfer is an important factor in life at the salt marsh. To maintain life, it is necessary for all organisms to have a balance of energy for movement, growth, reproduction, and maintaining a healthy life. Energy flows from sun to autotrophs, to organisms that eat autotrophs, and then to the organisms that feed on other organisms. When organisms eat each other, molecules are metabolized, and that is when energy is transferred. The amount of energy consumed in an ecosystem affects its structure.
A food chain is a diagram with a single pathway of organisms eating one another that results in energy transfer. The food relationships are usually too complex to be represented by a single chain. Many food chains in an ecosystem connect to form a food web. Producers. Producers are an organism that produce their own food. This group includes protists and plants. The next group to talk about are consumers. Consumers are organisms that have to eat each other for food. One example of a food chain down at the salt marsh is how small fish eat the plankton, and the small fish are eaten by bigger fish, and the bigger fish are in turn eaten by large birds and mammals. Now to Hunter at the salt marsh.
Squatch here. Trophic levels are the amount of energy stored in every level of the ecosystem. The first level is made up of producers such as plankton and plants. Some examples of producers at the salt marsh are spartina grass, pickled weed, and seaside goldenrod. The next level is made up of herbivores, or animals that only eat plants. Many of the herbivores down at the salt marsh include deer, crabs, small birds, and insects. The third level includes small carnivores, and the fourth and final level is made up of large carnivores. Some of these carnivores are large birds, coyotes, and raccoons, like Olivia Noon's spoons. Raccoons.
Thank you, Hunter. We are going to be covering population growth down at the salt marsh. Population growth is basically when the population of a specific species increases rapidly. A small population growth is fine, but when it increases too much, it can be bad for other species. It can also throw off the equilibrium of the whole ecosystem. Pertaining to Gooseneck Salt Marsh, population growth seems to be steady and the ecosystem is balanced. However, past storms have diminished the amount of spartina grass. The plant is essential for survival of life at the salt marsh. Mr. Dickinson and many of the biology students at Rogers High School have been growing spartina to bring down to the salt marsh and help repopulate it. Keep up the great work, guys. Now to Cedric at the salt marsh.
Cedric here. I'm here to talk about the phosphorus cycle. The phosphorus cycle begins when water and wind erode the phosphate-rich rocks. Then rivers carry gravel and silt down into the salt marsh and other estuaries. Runoff from the phosphate goes into farming, while the silt becomes sediment which they turn into new rocks. Animals eat the phosphate that has gone into farming, and the decomposers break down plant and animal matter into the soil. This leaks into bodies of water, and the cycle restarts with geographical uplifting pushing new rocks to the surface. Cedric out.
Thanks, Cedric. Carbon along with nitrogen makes up a large part of the atmosphere. Carbon is released when fossil fuels are burned and through cellular respiration. Fossil fuels are taken out of the earth and then burned, which releases the carbon. Over the past 150 years, the carbon level has increased more than 30%. By burning fossil and other organic matter, humans have been a large contributor to this increase. Now back to Hunter.
In order to make proteins and nucleic acids, all organisms need nitrogen. The nitrogen cycle is a complex pathway that nitrogen flows in an ecosystem. Even though nitrogen makes up more than half the atmosphere, it is still very difficult for organisms to get the nitrogen they need. Most plants can only use nitrogen in the form of nitrate. A difficult process called nitrogen fixation turns nitrogen into nitrate. Nitrogen-fixing bacteria is what transforms the nitrogen into a usable form. These bacterium live in the soil of swelling of roots of many plants. These plants provide carbohydrates that the bacteria need. Any leftover nitrogen is absorbed into the soil.
Thank you, Hunter. Weather conditions at the salt marsh vary from season to season. For example, this past winter was very harsh on the environment. The unusual amount of snow and the extremely cold temperatures until the middle of March caused a decrease in the Canadian goose population. With all the snow, the geese were not able to get to the plants they normally feed on. Much of the population died of starvation. Many of the geese had made their way up to Canada and are hopefully repopulating and preparing for next year. Thank you. Back to Cedric.
Water is a big aspect of life. Cells in all living organisms contain 70% to 90% water. Water is a provider to the environment in which most of life's chemical reactions occur. Water is not only trapped inside of organisms, but also on the surface of the earth. Water is found in the soil and vapor in the air also. The water cycle is a process that helps to keep the earth a clean environment and life healthy. Water vapor is stored in clouds where it then precipitates, which causes runoff. Runoff can turn into flooding, which can be a contributor to overwatering. Overwatering can kill living plants and can take food away from many living organisms. After runoff, it will fall into the salt marsh, where it then evaporates in the sky and makes clouds again. When water absorbs into the soil, it is called percolation into soil. Water inside of plants can evaporate into the sky, which is called transpiration.
Thank you for watching today's news on Down by the Salt Marsh, with a special thanks to Hunter and Cedric for their contribution to the show.
See you tomorrow.